I am Julia Lupton, former director of Illuminations, and I'm still helping coordinate our UCI Authors program, which began as a remote only. This is our first hybrid UCI Authors event. And we are really happy to feature faculty authors, staff authors, and alumni authors. And Sam Choi is one of those alumni authors. He also was a student of mine. He graduated from UCI in English in 1991. So many of you were probably not born yet in 1991. And I was younger then than I am now. I was a new assistant professor. And I came to UCI, and Sam was one of the students who found me, and I found him. And it was very exciting. His other advisor for his senior thesis was Professor Michelle Lachelet, who is also with us today. So this is really a very fun reunion for all of us to have Sam back here. Sam did his senior thesis. It was an epic poem based on the life of Spartacus, and it was very inventive, and it used both his creative writing abilities and his research abilities and his knowledge of the classics. We had never seen anything like it, nor have we since. Sam is one of a kind. Judy's going to say a little bit more about Sam's career path, because she actually met him at another university, Judy Woo, Professor Judy Wu, who's the director of the Humanities Center here. So I'll leave that saga, because everything with Sam is epic. So I'll leave that saga for her. But before I say that, I do want to say we have another UCI Authors event still this quarter, and it's also a UCI undergraduate alum. It's Elaine Chow, 09, so a different decade. And she has published her first novel. It's called Disorientation. And she will be here it'll be virtual only on Tuesday, May 17th. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Judy Woo for what we call a proper introduction. First, I want to put this from the amazing Dr. Sam Choi.
Pressure's on. Actually, I'm going to get Sam to talk about his own life instead of having me introduce him. I'm Judy Woo. I'm a professor of Asian American Studies. I direct the UCF Humanities Center. But I started out my academic career teaching at Ohio State University. In fact, my husband, who's in the audience, was also in faculty at the same time that Sam was there. And the reason I even am married to my husband is because of Sam. We met at faculty orientation. Sam was the only other person who looked Asian American in the room. So I kind of made a beeline for him and said, hi, wanted to get to know each other. And Sam is incredibly social. You were involved with like softball, you were involved with like museum outings, you like played a lot of roles in getting us together. And at that time, I was not at all aware of UCI as an institution. But when I came here, I finally understood that Sam came here as an undergraduate, has long ties to Orange County, and it's been such a thrill to be able to reconnect with him. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your kind of life trajectory from growing up in Orange County, going to UCI, you went to University of Pennsylvania for your PhD.
Yeah.
Was a faculty member for a few years in English, and then decided that you actually have some life skills beyond the academy that's taking you to other places. So
yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about your life.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. Thanks to UCI, thanks to Julie Lupton, Michelle, and you for inviting me here. And thanks for all of you for showing up. This is fantastic. It's so much fun to reconnect and come back to UCI. It's like, oh my God, it's been 30 years. It's crazy. So yeah, I grew up in Orange County. I graduated from El Medina High School in Orange, if you know that. We won the CIF championship. So I had nothing to do with it, but I watched. And then I came to UCI. The way I got into UCI was kind of a funny roundabout way. I don't know whether this thing still exists, but it was called the UPHSS or something like that. It was a university program for high school scholars. So you apply as a sophomore, junior, something like that. And you get into UCI, and then after school, you come to UCI and take classes. And so I came as a high school senior to take classes at UCI. And then I applied to a few other schools during my senior, but I knew UCI. I wanted them, and it was kind of scary. But so I came to UCI, and I got involved with the university newspaper. Where's our and back then, the university newspaper near you was printed in the university, and we had not done desktop publishing, so we were still doing the cutting it all up and on wax paper, putting them up on and such. And did that for three or 4 years. I was the assistant news editor, opinion page editor. I wrote a bunch of humor columns. Back then, it was called the UC Inc.
Sure, I can hear it.
Do you remember any? But I did that, and then I just loved school, and I took every single semester or quarter. I had to go to my academic counselor to get a sign off to take more than the allowable number of units, and so I wrote a UC Inc. about units, and where my first quarter I was a freshman, and then my AP credits came in, and my second quarter I was a sophomore, and then my other courses from credits from like summer school and things came in. Then I was a junior, and I was a senior by my second year, and then I was getting these letters requesting donations when I was like in my second year, and so I wrote a UC Inc. about this, and I graduated with I think you're required to have like 180 units to graduate, right? And I was going for 2 times, and I didn't quite get there. I had like 320 units or something like that, because I took like way over the number of units. I just enjoyed school, and so that's how I went to grad school. Was I just liked school? I wanted to keep going, and so I went to Professor Judy and said I want to keep going to school, which I did. I'll go to grad school, and so she suggested a bunch of grad schools, and I applied to grad schools. I went to University of Pennsylvania, mostly because they offered me the most money. I was very missionary, and I did the same thing there. I enjoyed that, and some of you probably know this. You just you want to do well in whatever it is you're doing. So the definition of doing well in grad school was to publish papers, go to conferences, and get an academic checkpoint. So I just did what I'm supposed to do, and I went to Ohio State and I met Judy, and she's right. I was goofing off. I was playing. I was the faculty advisor for the ultimate frisbee team at Ohio State, and we figured out a loophole because I only played 3 years while I was a Penn. I still had a year of eligibility left, and so I played on the undergraduate ultimate frisbee team as a professor and a faculty advisor. And then I played squash with all the faculty, and then blah 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 blah. So, and it was only a few years later. I enjoyed being a professor, but I realized I never really made the decision to be a professor. It was just like I did the thing, and I started thinking about, do I want to live in Ohio State for the rest of my life, and do I want and do I really love my topic? I'm good at it, but do I love it? And I saw people who loved their subject, and I said, I can't be that. I'm not going to be a star. I don't love my topic. I just do it because I'm good at it and it's kind of fun. I don't love it. And so I realized I'm not going to be ultimately successful in this. I got to do something else. And so that's when I left. And those of you who are in academics, leaving academics is more like leaving a religion than leaving a career. Right? And so it was painful for decades. I think I've gotten over it now. But that's where I am. And then I drew from my experience in, wax paper and markup and design. In fact, I can't draw to save my life, but I understand design and layout. And so I started getting into design, and I started managing design. As they say, that those who can't teach, those who can't teach administrate. So so I became a manager very quickly, and started going up that thing. So that's sort of my career trajectory. So I'm now the vice president of digital design at CBS Health, and it's, even though I can't design at all.
That's why you have a VP title.
Yeah, so I administer.
Well, this is a nice segue into your story.
Yeah.
So tell us about what inspired you to write, because you took a step away from academia, but obviously you still have literary aspirations, or did you discover them in the midst of the pandemic?
Well, I've always written. So as Julie and Michelle said, I've loved writing, and so writing and I write those annual Christmas letters.
These are epic, like model Christmas letters, the ones that you want to tear open the envelope to read.
So I always write. I've always written, and I've actually started and stopped several novels before. And what I realized is I'm pretty good at writing a scene. Like I can take a scene and make it kind of interesting and stuff, but there's no legs. It doesn't go anywhere. And this was the first time I had a story where it actually went somewhere. And it may have had something to do with the pandemic, where I had a more interesting topic. But what I was thinking about during the pandemic, this was at the height of the pandemic, right when we locked down. It was like March of that year when we started locking down and the freeways were empty and everything was like a ghost town. And so I had all this time because I used to commute to work back and forth. I used to use trains, planes, and automobiles flying all over the place. Doing that, I have all this time. And so I started writing. And what I was thinking about was people were talking about how this affects people. And they were talking about it from the perspective of the extroverts, saying, well, extroverts are crazy. And I said, well, it's tough on introverts too. And so I started thinking about what would it be like? And my own version, I don't speak for anyone else other than myself. But the way I see it, I mean, I tend to get to know people through activities first. So I do stuff with them, and then you start talking, and then you get to know them. But now that you're isolated, you can't go anywhere. It's like, who do you meet? There's no activity. There's no activity to be done. And so I was thinking about an introverted person who's suddenly very isolated. And that's when I came up with the character of someone who's recently divorced. He's now working at home. And so he's lost everything. He's completely isolated. And that was sort of the foundation of the story. And it had legs. I started adding things to it. Of course, he had to be Korean American. I have to draw from your own life, right? So I drew from my own life experience in that respect. And it just started having legs. And every day I woke up 2 or 3 hours before I need to go to work. And I just wanted to write. And it was an obsession. I just had to write. And every day I was writing and trying to discover what was going to happen. I was like, oh, wow, what is that? It's like, he's going to have this conversation with Sharon. I wonder what they're going to say. And I just let it go. And it was so much fun just discovering the story.
I'm glad you brought up Charlotte. So you mentioned that the main character is divorced. He's living on his own. He's incredibly isolated. But one of his main sources of joy is his relationship to his daughter, Charlotte. And she's 11, about to turn 12. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about maybe a passage from your book about that relationship.
Yeah, well, let me start with I think there's a quick little passage in here where I think I kind of describe the situation that I was describing of like imagining who would be very lonely. And this is very, very early on. And he's thinking about the birthday party that he's going to have to put on for his 11-year-old daughter, who's not going to have much of a birthday because we're all isolating. So he says, but today in thinking about the celebration for my child, I sense the passing of time. And painfully, I feel how time with my daughter is passing me by. Divorce was a major factor. In the few months after we moved to our separate places, I felt like my body had been hollowed out of all my organs and I floated about listlessly. It's just a shell of skin stretched over a bone. When I look at my life now and compare it to what I had, it feels quiet. All the sounds of life and activity are gone. My one-bedroom apartment is a lot smaller than the house we had. And since Charlotte sleeps in the pull-out sofa when I'm sitting on now, when she comes to visit, there's nothing that marks her place when she's not here. I should probably let her take my bedroom when she starts coming again so she can have some privacy. And maybe I can get a small dresser just for her so she can keep some clothes and things here. I look around and I see no traces of her, except her soccer picture from last season sitting on top of my pile of project plans from my work desk. She didn't leave anything last time she came and went, except for her iPad charger. And I think I was now welcome to the crayon marks on the walls and the stains on the carpet in the house we once shared. And I wait for the phone, all still in the 600 square feet I have to call home. There are no footsteps, bumps, or jumps. There are no opening of drawers, no slamming of doors, and there are no voices. I didn't hang any traditional clocks, as I always point out. We see time everywhere, on our phones, microwaves, computers, iPads, everything else. As I stare at blank TV and empty walls, nothing marks the passage of time now. I once read an article in which an astronomer discussing the vacuum of space asked philosophically whether time could be thought to exist if there were no motion. When we were family, Charlotte was usually the motion in our lives. Even when we sat on opposite sides of the sofa and silently read our own books, there was a cadence to our turning of pages, or shifting of our weight, or occasional flipping of our hair to mark our time together. Divorce made me feel lost. Now COVID makes me feel empty, like I'm in that vacuum of space.
Oh.
So that's sort of the setup of where, and yet, yeah, I mean, Charlotte is his life. That's what I was sort of imagining, is he's lost everything, but Charlotte is his life. And he's like, what do you do when you can't even see her anymore?
That's a really moving passage, and that relationship's really moving. What struck me, I mean, he's so desirous of contact, right? Because of the divorce, there are different households, because of the fear of COVID, he can't actually see her. His wife has said no kissing, right? So no physical kind of contact. But it really is interesting to me that when the main character communicates with his daughter, he's always thinking, how do I translate this in a way that will help her understand, help her think about something that's positive. I don't know if you want to say something about that translation process as a parent, and also trying to translate this across that iPad, right?
Yeah. I mean, because he's trying to be a good parent, right? And because of his divorce, they agreed that they're not going to see each other. So he misses all of his visitations, and he's like really upset about this. He only gets to see her on the iPad, and he's trying to take advantage of every moment he has. And it's like, how can I still be a parent to my daughter? And yeah, so it's definitely a thing. And then the other thing I think is not only to try to translate, the experiences that he had into some kind of lesson for her. He's also then thinking about, the passage of time. Like, I'm losing every minute here. I'm losing each of these months I don't get back. And he's thinking about that. And then that's when the multi-generational aspect comes into it. When he thinks about his parents with respect to him, he then thinks about his daughter with respect. So I'm not going to, I just read a long passage. So I'm going to go to a short one. Or
It wasn't so long.
it wasn't so long?
No.
It didn't feel so long?
I was just going to say one thing about time, which I think a lot of us felt loss of time. Our loss of our sense of time during the pandemic, right? We didn't have our regular routines, and it didn't feel like our routines meant the same things, right? But it seems like the loss of time is especially poignant when you see a young child growing,
Exactly.
but also when someone's aging, right? Because the father is middle-aged, and he's trying to get his bearings.
Yeah.
But I think you were going to talk about, we talk about his relationship with his daughter, and there's also this very interesting relationship he has with his parents, and especially his father.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you like the.
Yeah, so I'll try to go kind of quickly and not read too much, but this is a passage where he sees his daughter for the first time in months, and he's just overjoyed, and it's for the birthday, and so I'll start just at the very beginning of that part, and then they kind of moves off, and then it goes into the birthday where then it starts to translate into the media and how he thinks about his parents and things like that. So this is after he's there, he sort of sets up, and he said, I hear Charlotte yell, I'm done! And she runs out of the room. The sofa is deep, and I'm not nearly quick or agile enough to stand up and be able to give her the hug I wanted to. Where I pick her up and twirl her around and around and tell her I love her, she plops down on the sofa right next to me and almost knocks me over as I'm trying to get up. And she yells right in my ear, Daddy! I want to yell out too, but my right ear is ringing and I don't want to risk any damage to her developing eardrum. So I answer in a much more measured tone. Happy birthday, princess. I love you. And blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip a little bit. And okay. He says, Daddy, what do you think of our new house? Tell me about the new things in your house now, she says with genuine enthusiasm. I love your new house, princess. I'm still staring at her, looking at every part of her, updating my mental image with as much precision as I can. She'll never be alone again. I need to preserve this. Tell me what you like about it. I like our deck. We didn't have much a deck at our old house. I can go outside without really going outside. I just take my iPad outside, and my friends will think I'm outside. Daddy, you don't have a deck, do you? What do you think of our deck? She still has this rapid fire conversational style with me. I think it's only with me. I've heard her talking with her friends, and she's not like that at all. I love your deck, Charlotte. Are you going to call me from your deck next time we chat? I asked, still holding her tight. She thinks about it for a second, cocks her head to the side, and then playfully says, no, I don't want to. Come on, Daddy, come upstairs. And she wriggles away from my grasp, jumps up from the sofa, starts hopping toward the spiral stairs. We have an even bigger deck upstairs. It's so big, you have to open a huge glass doors and you can open it all the way. It's so big. I don't even go up there that much because I guess it's too big for me. Come on, Daddy, let's go up to the big deck. And so that's a little bit of the relationship that he has with her. And then he plays around with her a little bit upstairs. And then he's thinking about going back down. And let me take it up where I say, where he's looking at the patterns of the carpet where she rolled around the floor, and he sent her down to the party to start the party. And he says, I locked the sliding glass door and carefully stepped over the squiggly patterns in the carpet where Charlotte rolled on the floor. Sophie will probably clean up the condo tomorrow, and if she vacuums up here, she'll erase the only physical trace of one of my most joyful moments I've had with Charlotte for this year. When I descend the stairs, I see that they've already started, and Charlotte is talking to my parents about her new school. They didn't need me at all to start the FaceTime call. Her new friends, Kathy, Francine, Ling, and somebody, are all fairly talkative and add numerous comments about the teachers they like, the boys they don't, the gross smelling frog from science last year, the excuses they tried to get out of PE. I have the impression that my parents are only catching a fraction of the content. They're not used to tracking a conversation that changes topics so rapidly and with so little transition. The language barrier is not helpful either, as their English is weak even when talking slowly face to face. It's obvious that none of this really matters to them at all. Just seeing Charlotte and hearing her voice, whatever words might be in whatever language, is the definition of happiness for them. The technology is interesting to watch, as each speaker is in a frame that floats about the screen that grows and shrinks in size depending on the amount of interaction. As I watch all this, I can't help but imagine when I might be in this position using whatever intermediate technology to see my dear Charlotte's baby. Will I be sharing my floating frame with someone? Or will Sophie and I each be alone in our own small frames in a corner, like my parents are now? So that's where he sort of transitioned. He thinks about his parents.
That's really striking in the story that he wants so much to communicate with his daughter, and with his parents, it feels more like an obligation. And that there's this great passage, and maybe you'll share about he's counting how many words he's likely to have with his parents, especially his father, who's the more taciturn.
Yeah. You're thinking exactly what I'm thinking. And so this is where he has to go to his parents' house to take his father to the hospital because they think maybe he has COVID. And he's kind of a hypochondriac. First, he kind of blows him up and he obviously doesn't have COVID. But then he said, no, your dad's trying to avoid going to hospital. Well, that's serious. And so this is where he kind of goes in and he's trying to drag him out. He's like, I help him to the door. He suddenly stops and calls my mother, Yo, keys. And then he says to me, we take my car. Appa, I say, exasperated, trying to pull him along. We don't have time for this. We take my car. It'll only be a short ride. But he braces himself against a door frame and refuses to move. For an old man who just a few seconds ago could barely stand, he's demonstrating a lot of strength. No, he says firmly, we take my car. And he yells out for my mother again, Yo, keys. And if the fake weak voice from a minute ago is totally gone. I cease struggling and accept my fate. My father's hatred of the Japanese is stronger than the gravitational pull of black holes. I'll have to come back here, return his car, so he won't have to ride in mine. Oh, he has a Japanese car.
The main character has a Japanese car, and the father has a Buick, right?
Yeah, and the father has a Buick because he refuses to buy a Japanese car. The hospital is very close to their house, which is probably part of the reason my father goes there so often. In addition to the fact that the ER is open 24 hours without appointment, I've told him multiple times that ER is not a good way for him to deal with minor illnesses that's designed mostly to patch you up enough to keep you alive until you make an appointment to see your own doctor. He doesn't care. As I stop by, I look over at him, reclined in the passenger seat with his eyes closed, with no sunglasses since he's not at the house. And I can't deny the resemblance. I will likely look like him in 30 years. I see his stubbornness in his jawline. He is strong and bold and supports his proud chin jutting out under his hard, square face. I absolutely rub the stubble on my own chin. I wonder if my own stubbornness will frustrate Charlotte later as much as his does me now. I think about my interactions with my father these days. They're pathetically perfunctory. I try to have lunch with my father about twice a month. Add in visits for holidays, I probably see him 30 times a year, which means I'm scheduled to see him about 450 times before he dies. COVID has stolen 3 lunches already, 447 left. And during some of these lunches, I might only say 100 words in our conversation. Most of them just repetitions of words used in previous fortnight about the weather or food we're eating. Only the immediate presence exists in our conversations. There's no talk of our past or future. 45,000 words, not even enough for a novella. Maybe just 2 or 3 hours of reading is all the mundane dialogue that remains for my father and me.
Wow. Yeah, it's really powerful. And I remember, so Sam shared drafts of his novel with me, and I was giving him comments. And my father actually passed away during COVID, and I ever sharing with him, and this shows up in the novel, that you when you go into certain medical facilities, you can't gain access, right? Only the patient is inside, and so the loved ones can't visit. And I remember one of the institutions said he has to be actively dying before family members can be let in. And that phrase was just so surprising to me. Like, passive dying is not enough. Like, what is active dying look like? But it's so interesting that there's obviously a connection, right? A physical, biological connection, but there's such an emotional distance. And I don't know if you want to comment on that. Is that part of being Korean American, right? They both immigrated. There is obviously, you go back and forth. The main character goes back and forth in Korean and English.
Yeah.
And so is it partly kind of a linguistic divide? What are your thoughts about that distance?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was an undergrad here, my freshman year, my professor asked me the same question. And because we were reading Woman Warrior about Asian American, and that time it was kind of a new novel too. And I was one of at UCI, I was one of few Asian in the class. That was a long time ago. and so the professor invited me to share, and I didn't know what to make of it at the time. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily my experience, but I knew as some people of my generation, and for this one friend of mine, very, very close friend, his parents wanted their children to integrate into society very, very quickly. And so they forbade him to speak Chinese in the house. And so so he grew up only speaking English and did not know much Chinese, and knew only a couple words. And of course, I at the time, I don't know whether he regretted that or not. But what I realized as I was getting older and finally a little bit more mature, is we always talk about the sacrifices of our parents as immigrants, what they did, and my father had a degree in engineering, but when he first came, he was a janitor, but he couldn't speak English. And then for most of his career, he was a tool and die maker, which is several levels lower than an engineer, but he accepted that because. And so we didn't talk about those sacrifices, but we don't think of, or I didn't think of, I didn't think about the additional sacrifices even beyond that, right? And that they're kind of forever distanced from their children and from their family because of language, because of culture, right? I speak okay Korean, but not great, and but understanding that my parents aren't going to be able to communicate with their grandchildren, and so when we had our son, we made a deliberate decision that we would speak only Korean for the first 4 years of his life. And so he was actually a native Korean speaker, but as soon as he went to school, it destroyed everything. And so now he speaks only English. And I think about it, it's like, wow, not only you think about the sacrifices they made when they were adults, but you think about, I don't know whether they had thought through the implications of that, of how isolated they would be, from even their own family.
Yeah. character is obviously in a sandwich situation, right?
Yeah.
He's thinking about how to be a good parent. He's also trying to think about how to be a responsible son. And then the main character, the 40-something, right, is obviously also going through a lot of midlife challenges. So I was wondering if you wanted to share a little bit more about that or the crises that he's experiencing.
Yeah. Again, the original idea for the character was, how do I isolate this character and just beat him up, really? And so the COVID really created that, but then the Korean Americanness and such, it helped sort of create that situation. So in terms of midlife crisis, the original idea was that everyone was going to have a midlife crisis, right? But the story started getting too complicated. Just too, and it's like, I can't do that. Make it simpler. And then when Taffy, the Flashman, is in trouble, she took that idea, and she published it. So it's like, all right, I'm not going to do that. It's not. I don't know whether he has a bona fide midlife crisis, but it's just a lot of pressure and so many things, and the COVID just exacerbating everything. So he obviously didn't have the best relationship with his parents to begin with, but COVID exacerbated that. And then he had already had a divorce with his wife, but COVID exacerbated that. And then he was having issues with his work. He was kind of not that motivated, and COVID exacerbated that. So that's really what was happening. But in the process, the course of the novel, I think he comes to a new realization, right? He learns about himself. He learns about his relationship, especially with his friends. And then at the end when he renames his daughter, it's sort of trying to what's the best way to describe it? Sort of reintroducing Koreanness to his family.
Yeah, there's a number of things I want to talk to you about. So one of the favorite passages I love about the book is his bro relationships. The main character has these two guys that he hangs out with, that he does sports with. It's a little bit of a competition, but also they spend a lot of time drinking beer, eating ramen together, and just kind of having guy talk. So I don't know if you want to share a passage or if you want to comment a little bit.
Yeah, I like a couple of those. So I'm going to skip around a little bit and do a couple. But one of the other themes or threads is sort of this inability to communicate, where he wants to communicate but he can't. And I feel like, again, I can only speak for myself. I want to say, men do this, but I don't know if men do this. I just do this. But I feel like I can't always have very intimate conversations with my male friends. And you always end up sort of kind of trivializing and making fun of each other and say, you jerk, and that kind of thing. And it's hard to get into that very intimate space. And so this is where he's trying to talk to his best friend Tim about this obsession that he has with we haven't talked about the internet idol. He falls in love with this internet idol, and he, of course, it's embarrassing, but he wants to talk to about it. How do I talk to my friend about this really embarrassing, stupid thing? And so he comes up with this idea. And so after playing racquetball, he says, "All right," he says, "both of us are in that exhausted, cool down stupor. I'm just lucid enough to hatch a plan to see if I might be able to talk to Tim about my internet obsession. I asked him as if out of the blue, so who do you think are the most beautiful Korean celebrities right now?" Without even opening his eyes, he answered, "Dude, there's so many. They're so beautiful. There's Song Hye-kyo, there's Park Shin-hye, and Ji Ji-woon. She's a little older, really popular. Han Hye-ju, Kim So-yeon, Lee Han-hee. Oh, she was Miss Korea, almost won Miss Universe." Tim is rapturously reciting his catalog of actresses the way that Homer might have performed the catalog shifts. And I can't really make heads or tails of this list, but my plan is working. I get out my phone and tap a picture of Son Hye-kyo. Find the picture, show it to him. He glances with just one eye, approvingly looks. Without missing a beat, he briefly summarizes her top hits, the scandal over divorce, the speculation of plastic surgery, as outing celebrities for their plastic surgery is a major pastime in glamour-obsessed Korean culture. We continue this kind of thing until I decide it's time. I surreptitiously get an image of my internet angel pretending to happen upon this photo among all the celebrity photos. And I instantly asked, so what about her? She's pretty, I don't know. She must come from one of the young ones coming up. There are hundreds of new actresses. They all look the same. He makes his comment after only the most cursory of glances. I can feel magma of anger welling up from the core of my body. I can't sit still. I get up and pace in front of Tim, and he stirs up a little dust and wafts. I'm completely taken by surprise by my own physiological reaction. After a few dozen heartbeats, I declare intolerably frustrated. Dude, it's getting hot. I don't want to sit here all day. I take a big swallow of Gatorade and walk around the court and start retrieving balls we hit over the wall. And the long walk might help me cool down. I don't want to see Tim right now, that turd. And so there's a little bit of that. And then after he gets stuck on the fence, I'm going to skip the fence part.
It's hilarious. You have to read that part.
So he gets stuck on the fence and on that, but I'm going to skip that part too, where he finally helps his friend get off the fence. Dude, you owe me a pair of shorts, Tim says, looking up at his black Nike shorts still hanging up on the top of the fence. Dude, you owe me 2 balls in your life. You kicked and stepped on every part of my head and shoulders from every angle, I reply indignantly. And whilst trying to shake some of the dirt out of my hair and brush it out of my shirt, I noticed Tim's green and red striped boxer shorts. Dude, what's with those old men baggy boxer shorts? Are those back in style now? He looks down and shrugs. Dude, tell me about it. They suck. But Shelly says I have to wear them now. No hot baths or showers. Huh? I'm completely lost. What are you talking about? Tim takes a deep breath, and then another, and he says, okay, you can't tell anyone. We're thinking about having a baby. I imagine that I must have looked like the cartoon character with silver dollar eyes and size eyes coming out of my head with jaw dropping down my chest. What? I know, he says with an exacerbated look. You guys both said you would decide you're not going to have children. I'm practically yelling. I know. You're 46 years old. As I gesticulate with my hand. I know. Shelly's 43 years old. I know. You're going to be in Social Security. You're going to be on Social Security before your grandfather or before your kid graduates college. I know. If it's a girl, you're going to be like 6-year-old grandpa for her on her father-daughter dance. I know. Dude, I yell. I know. He yells back. We were quiet for a while. Several long seconds passed without word. It's uncomfortable. I look at Tim and he starts to pat his shirt and boxers to get some of the dirt off his back, but without much success. I try to picture him as a father. I don't think I've ever seen him holding a baby. I start thinking about all the play dates and parties we had for Charlotte over the years. And I think about the different ways she changed our life. I don't even have the same friends now because of her, as most of our friends are parents of Charlotte's friends. He's just standing there, expressionless. I let out sighs. Dude. He takes a deep breath, and reflecting back in the same tone, he replies, yeah, I know.
I really love those passages because even though you talk about the kind of difficulties of the men communicating, they really care about each other and they're checking in with each other and saying, are you happy? Are you depressed? Right?
Yeah.
I think they're finding ways to express emotion, which I find really beautiful and really funny. You mentioned this is the other part of the title, right? A fanboy. So he has this obsession with this Korean beautiful woman who is mainly a social media presence in his life that feels maybe even more real, right, than his actual relationship. And so that's one relationship that he has to Korea. The other one is that he decides at some point in the novel to go to Korea and to actually see his family and they're sort of connected, right? He's hoping that maybe he'll actually see her in person. But what he actually does is connect with his family. So I was wondering if you want to say a little bit more or if you want to share passages about kind of the fantasy versus the reality.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. So there's this fantasy and there's the relationship has the 3 women, right? His ex-wife, the woman he's been dating fairly recently, and then this internet idol, and some of my early readers in early versions, but I don't know who he's going to go for, right? and they're like rooting for it, like they should go for her, they should go. And then, but after a couple of the tougher chapters where he has tough conversations with one of, I think it was Margaret Norris, Professor Margaret Norris. She said, "Oh, I think I understand now why he has that internet obsession." because he's having these really tough conversations and frustrating and stressful conversations with the real women in life. So he goes, "Oh, I get it." And so that's sort of what is happening. But yeah, and so he knows it's stupid and ridiculous. But when all these things come to a head, he goes, it's sort of a secret wish that maybe if I go to Korea, I'll see her. And so that's the midlife crisis breaking point, where it's a stupid idea that he thinks if he goes to Korea, he might run into her on the street. And yeah, and he knows how stupid it is. What's a good passage to read from there? What did you have something in mind?
I don't know. Each of the chapters begins with the obsession, which
Yeah,
I think is so interesting, right? He wakes up and immediately it's the fantasy that draws him. And then the rest of the chapter, the rest of the day is dealing with the reality of his life. So I really love that contrast.
yeah. And so I'm going to read sort of a later portion of that, because at first when I did that, they were just kind of random stuff, and my reader said, "Oh, it's really lovely, but is it going anywhere?" And so I started rewriting those to create a little bit of a narrative for her, and then I started creating a little bit of a narrative of his sort of pseudo relationship with her. And so this is very late in this, when he's been seeing a lot, and he starts to sort of think about who she is as a person, right? Because early on she's just like, "Oh." So he said, "I go back to a picture I found a few weeks ago and feel again all the emotion that stirred up in me. It was uploaded 3 months ago. It has over 8,000 likes and 40 comments. Sorry. Let me start with the like, because I think that one's a funny one, right? This is early on. And so early on, he's trying to get her to notice it. And she's got like 200,000 followers. He goes, "How's he gonna notice me?" So he starts, "I got a like." I wake up one morning and find a comment that I left on a photo last night, and it got the attention of my angel. She left me a like. Simultaneously, I feel exuberance, joy, satisfaction, relief. I can't sit still as I read her post again and scroll down to my comment. I read all the other comments that received replies and likes from her, and I scroll up and do it again. In her picture, she's standing in a hall, wearing stonewashed blue jeans and white halter top. Her long hair falls past her shoulder and almost blends with her black poodle that she holds on her side. She's holding up her phone with one hand, her long, slender fingers expertly steadying it, and she's looking intently at the screen, her face fixed with the stoicism of divinity. It appears she's photographing her reflection off a mirror that must be at the end of the hall. The angle of the picture highlights her long limbs, and some of her followers comment that she looks like a mannequin or a Korean Barbie. A storm of contradictory emotions swirls inside of me. I feel excitement, glee that electrifies my body. I have to stand up and pace to validate that I really got this like from her. I also feel deep, satisfying relief. I wonder about the sensation, why it should be so strong. Perhaps this is what salvation feels like. When a mortal comes before his goddess, she deigns to look upon him, and for one brief instant, I exist. So that's early in the relationship. And so this is much later. I go back to the picture that I found a few weeks ago and feel again all the emotion that stirred up in me. It was uploaded 3 months ago, has over 8,000 likes and 40 comments. She was standing at the sea, and the black rocky shore is midground to the background of this calm azure water. The sky is cloudy, and it disperses the light of the sun waning off the photo on the left. I can see a cool breeze caress her skin and loosen strands of her long hair. And her face in profile is warmed by the last orange rays of dusk. Her gaze is abstract. Her expression is forlorn. I can stare at this photo forever. I read her caption, which I translate roughly as, "A person may be a good person, but if her relationships are not good, it's not a good experience." Even with my poor grasp of that language, I can sense the poetry of her expression in Korean. She spoke to me, and I yearned to reach across the span of time and space to embrace her at the moment. My heart was already there, but my body was some 6,000 miles away. I went to a shelf where I kept some old books from college and flipped through an anthology with urgency. I found a poem that I encountered in my first year literature course. I see what Keats saw in Inspiration Urn. This fleeting moment the world will never see again, immortalized for me. She cannot fade, because thou hast not thy bliss. She will forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. A few comments from her followers suggest that she had just ended a relationship. They say that the relationships are all about timing. But now I appreciate a few more details of the picture that I didn't notice before. In her left hand, she is cradling her phone low in front of her. She's not looking at it. And with the right hand away from the camera, she is perhaps managing her hair, fluttering in the wind, or perhaps cupping her ear to hear better a voice from a caller coming through her earbud. Is this her expression in deep introspection or in a moment of heartbreak? Her lips are slightly parted, perhaps sipping a wisp of cool ocean breeze, or perhaps forming her farewell to a love soon to be lost. I grasp now my misreading of this picture. I understand better why I'm so continually drawn to it. She's not the object, but the subject of desire. She's not presenting herself to be admired. She's granting me a glimpse of her deep love for another. Now I'm reminded of one of the few Shijo poems I know by Fanjini, the most famous and said to be the most brilliant and beautiful of the kissing poets. Oh, that I might cut out the belly of this deep winter night and roll it gently inside my spring quilt, to unfurl it in the evening when my beloved returns. I think about this again and appreciate how only a kissing could have written this poem.
I love all the literary references throughout the book.
Yeah, I'm a geek, I can't.
It comes across. I wanted to ask more about the character's discovery of Korea. Because he goes and he meets with his relatives, he meets with his uncles, and all of a sudden they start telling him stories that his father has not present, right?
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier, it's like it's only the present. There's no past and there's no future. It's only the present. And when he goes to Korea, he discovers this long history, personal history as well as natural history. So I was wondering if you can say a little bit more about that. That's really kind of one of the climaxes, or like the climax.
Yeah. I think the climax of the story is when they climb the mountain, and so. But I think this
No
is
spoilers.
no spoilers. But so yeah. Just again, I only speak for myself. I won't speak for anyone else's experience. When we immigrated, I immigrated when I was 3 years old. And it's funny, it's very much like a passage in Moon Warrior, where I think she says that they always imagine going back to China. And we had that in our household, where my parents kind of said, well, we might go back to Korea. And so we had these suitcases that we brought from Korea. And it's like, but we kept them because we might go back to Korea. And so there was, but we never talked about it. Right, so it's like, all right, we might go there. And I had 3 years old, a couple of vague memories of Korea. We're gonna go there, what's going to happen? And so it was this, never-ending myth that we might go back to Korea, but we never learned much about it. We never, and I remember when I had to do the family tree, and all my classmates had these huge family trees, and I had like my parents, my grandmother, and we didn't know, and we were shut off from everything, because back then, long distance call, all you guys don't know what this means. but back when I was a kid, there was one phone in the house, and you had to dial it. Right? And to call Korea, it took minutes to call you. And it's like 50 cents a minute. And back then, 50 cents was a gallon of gas. So it was a lot of money. And it was like, what's happening? Bye. And so, we had these tiny little messages of Korea, of like what's happening, and we didn't really know. And so, in this story, he knows nothing about it, and he realizes his parents have like not told him all sorts of things. And so am I allowed to do spoilers or not? Is it okay? Yeah, you read passage
We
late.
have time for some Q&A.
Oh, okay, we'll stop.
Well, I have not been watching the webinar because there's some sound interference up here. So I'm going to pull up the webinar. But as I do that, please, I want to encourage you to ask questions, offer comments. Please.
Okay, I have 2 questions. one, you talked about, you were headed in the direction of professor, and you said, oh, I like it, I'm good at it, but I don't love it. And then you had this sort of withdrawal for a decade or so. And
So that everyone can hear.
and now you're administrating.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, do you love that? I mean, or do you think, gee, maybe academia would have been the thing for me? And my other question is, are there autobiographical elements in the book?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's Korean, right?
Yeah.
Not the word.
Let me start with the last part. So yeah, I'm going to quote Wayne's great writers that I read, because he's much smarter than I am. But it's like everything. There's some things in here that are things that I myself experienced. There are other things in here that people have experienced that they told me about. And there's things that I've only experienced in my imagination, but they are all personal to me. Because if they weren't, they wouldn't be real and they wouldn't be worth reading or writing or reading about. So in that respect, I feel, even if it didn't actually happen to me, sometimes it feels like it did. But yes, I certainly draw from my life. I didn't actually have any one person here. So there's pauses, there are fragments of conversations I've had with people, but there isn't a person in here. And this isn't me. I'm not divorced. Not yet.
But I do see Sam in his writing, like the literary references, the bro culture. I definitely see all the elements.
That's not me.
That's kind of my memory of you too.
I know, because I play Ultimate Frisbee all the time, right? So the second part of the question, or the first part of the question I left academics because I didn't love academics. I would say two things. One is, as I mentioned, leaving academics. I mean, leaving academics is like leaving religion. And being an academic was your identity, or at least it was for me.
Yeah.
And so there was no other self other than the professor. So, and it killed me that I entirely lost the ability to read for pleasure. And the thing that got me into being an academic, I couldn't do anymore. Because every time I read anything, I was taking notes. It's like, I could be teaching about this. I could be writing about this. I had the subscription to the New York Times, and I was constantly circling, ripping out and photocopying, thinking, I might use this, who knows? And so I say that because one difference is, I think in most normal careers, is not your identity, is not who you are as a person. It's what you do. It's great if you love it. And I wouldn't say I love it like it's my life obsession, but I love what I do, and I feel it very rewarding. So I make fun of the fact that I run design that I can't draw to save my life, but I love the work that I do. In that at 17 years ago, I started Kaiser Permanente. You know that, right? When I started there, I thought, yeah, I'll be here for another 3 years, go on, do something else. But I drank the Kool-Aid. And at the time, 17 years ago, emailing your doctor was not a thing. It was not, and we were working on that. And when we launched it, we got this email from a user who said, "Thank you. You've changed my life." I was like, I'm a disabled person, and it used to take me all day. I'd have to call the van full service to pick me up at some time. And I go there and I wheel myself around to the doctor's office, and I go somewhere else. And then at the end, I wait for the van full. I'm exhausted at it. Now I can email my doctor. I can get a test result. It's like, you have completely changed my life. Where do you get that? And so I drink the Kool-Aid on what I do. So even though I can't draw to save my life, I'm dedicated to the mission of being in healthcare and the fact that this great design helps people. And this is something I talked to my own design staff about, where I said, look, we're a healthcare company. We're not Pandora. We're not Instagram. We're not out here to have people show movies of let's think about what creativity means for us. And let's think about what innovation means for us in this. Wouldn't it be great if we redefined creative? And the reason I say this is because people are saying, oh, we can't be creative because we have to worry about accessibility. We have to worry about this. I said, what if we redefine creativity and innovation as not having whiz-bangled stuff and saying, but what if we said being the most inclusive and digital presence? What if that is how we define creativity and innovation? If we can be the most inclusive website and web app out and mobile app out there, so that everyone who needs our help can use it. Isn't that a way to think about creativity and innovation? That drives me.
Oh, I've never heard you talk about that. That's great.
I know you did. I'm not
I do have some questions from the internet, so maybe I'll ask one and I'll rotate people here.
Oh, what, Nigel?
Actually, there's 3 questions. Maybe I'll say all of them, and then you can decide what you want to say.
Yeah.
Okay. First one from Nigel Nicholson. I don't have a funny question, but did your literary theory training and teaching help or get in the way with this writing? Example, when you think about things that are real, do you start folding in on yourself? Kirk Davis, what is your interest in making a movie of your book? Has it already been optioned? Beirut Shroff, thank you for a great reading. Could you comment a bit more on the words fanboy in the title, which is intriguing?
Let me start with the last one. Thank you for that question. I didn't give it that much thought. I think I saw a movie or something about fangirl. I said, wow, this is a fanboy. And so I didn't give it much thought. But as I started thinking more about what it means to be someone who's an observer of media, I do get into that at the very, very end, because most of the time he has nothing, right? He's just an observer. He's just an observer, and he's just an observer. And at some point, he realizes, oh, it's what I am. And it's a little bit about him talking about his adolescence, about how he feels like he's going back into adolescence. Some of us, as we get into social media, are re-experiencing that kind of adolescence where, everything is like we're in the middle of everything, right? And it's all about us, right? That's what adolescence sometimes is about, where young people start to realize that they're social animals, that they're people who are looking at that. And so the experience of social media. So I do get into that a little bit.
The movie.
The movie. There are no movie rights. It's yours for $1. So some of my friends tell me you should have made it better so that it could be a movie, because it's kind of a very introspective kind of.
There's a lot of references to K-dramas.
Yeah. So I don't know how well introspective novels work as movies. One of my favorite books, Empire Falls, wonderful book. They made it in a movie. It's like, it just doesn't work that well. And then to my friend Nigel, long time no see. Theory training, I found it useful to the extent that I made him a nerd. And so he quotes Latin passages, he quotes David Hume and Kant and Socrates and that kind of. So I made him a nerd, and it was very useful for that. With respect to my literary training, I think, this is I think akin to people who ask, do you regret getting a PhD, right? Or would you have done differently? I'm a bit of a existentialist, and that's a nonsensical question for me, because all that stuff is the person that I've become. So I would not have even thought to do the things I would, or to write the things I would have written had it not been for that training. So I would say that there's no way I would have written this book the way that I had written it had I not read all that stuff. But I haven't unpacked whether it was good or bad.
Well, it is 6 o'clock. If people here have questions, I know Sam's going to be around and he'd be happy to sign your books, and there's food, so please grab that. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I do want to thank Ju Hoon Sin, who's made all these arrangements. Critical Creative Studies for co-sponsoring. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you for coming.
It was great.
And both of you. That was just perfect.
It was fun.